for interfering with the real world. Just leave me out of it, will ya? Who the hell are you?
Well, you know. So happens I kissed an angel. Huh?
Serial Experiments Lain often receives the tag Prophetic due to its scary comparisons to our modern age. The anime follows Lain Irakura, a shy junior high student who's just beginning a venture into the new digital world around her. Desperate for connection in a world which seems to lack it on the whole, Lain begins dipping into technology to fill that void. Her first step is quite simple, emailing her classmate Chisa. Well, it's a bit more complex than that. The anime opens on Chisa committing suicide, and this exchange of emails happens afterwards, as Chisa beckons Lain to follow her, give up on her physical form to join the Wired, essentially their version of the internet. Since her friends make fun of her and her family ignores her, Lain keeps going down this rabbit hole of connection, going from a technophobe to a complete expert, shocking even her computer-obsessed father, as her room becomes a domain of the digital. Her sense of self splits as she becomes known by people she's never met on the Wired. They claim to know someone completely different from her, but with her form, one she eventually confronts. As her own deeds, both active and passive, known and unknown, catch up with her, Lain finds only one solution: to merge her own being with the Wired itself. She wars with the de facto god who beckoned her in, taking over and erasing all memories of herself from existence, as she's now broken down the barrier between human consciousness and the Wired, and can influence reality however she wants. She has become God. Technology changed her from a timid young girl into this. Whether it ruined her life or made it is up for debate and has been for years, but today we're gonna talk about something a little bit different. That's just a baseline of the main points for what we're discussing today, its prophetic nature. Released in 1998, the anime almost looks like a Simpsons clip depicting the future. It shows us addiction to technology, a complete breach of privacy in the digital age, different personas online, rapid advancement with negative consequences, immense psychological impacts, children becoming overly adult while still overly young, and even infobesity, the complete information overload, which gives us some of the most surreal and engaging bits of anime ever crafted. At least if you like weird stuff like me. All of this seems to make a before its time point on the dangers of technology, predicting the future before we ever knew it. But I'd like to suggest that we shift this conversation from what it predicted to why it was able to do so, and what that says about us. I don't think Serial Experiments Lain simply predicted shallow elements of the future. I think it read the past to make a cohesive and deeply impactful point about human nature and how technology extends that nature. So let's start going through some of the claims that can be attributed to predicting the future, explaining how they're present in the anime and why they're not simply prophetic, but more so personal to humans. Let's start with addiction to technology. This could really be proved by the entire anime. But if we get a little bit creative in the reading, Lain's whole journey could be one of a girl succumbing to technology. It's not impossible to imagine the entire course of events, told mostly by her perspective, is just the workings of a mind becoming engrossed in the absolute wealth of information around it, eventually falling down rabbit holes and going completely mad. It would help explain some of the downright oddities in a way that makes no less sense than the plot itself. But even if we look at it more directly, this still remains. All of Lain's problems arise from and then are solved with technology. There's nothing in her life which happens without it by the end. In fact, she's literally one with it. I don't think it gets more addictive than that. But there's also her father, a man who comes home and doesn't even speak to his family before going right to his new PC parts and installing them. When his daughter comes down to speak to him, he really only talks at her, engaging more so in her sudden interest in technology than actually in her words. But I have a whole video about how Lain makes these scenes so striking, so I'll stop repeating myself here. We also see an unnamed character seeking to join the Knights, basically Serial Experiments Lain's world's version of the Illuminati. That was an awful sentence, but he walks around the real world only seeing through his augments of technology, ignoring everything but what appears on his screen. And there's the whole argument of characters giving up their bodies to live in the Wired, which could also be seen as an analog to one simply, say, sitting inside and wasting away online, so much so they can't make themselves stop. And this kind of addiction is something that exists in our world. 31% of Americans say they're online constantly, and internet addiction is defined among other more common addictions. We all have anecdotal evidence of being too reliant on technology at times, whether it's scrolling through the same feed every 15 minutes or only falling asleep with a video playing 5 inches from our faces. Anytime I have a few free seconds, like walking to the bathroom, I'll read a few tweets. If not addiction, it's at least an extreme habit. If you existed in the 2010s, you probably remember the complete flood of early memes and articles about the millennials and how smartphones actually made us dumb, haha. But all of this is rooted in reality somewhere, but to talk about addiction in technology in any way, we have to first address the truth of this sentiment we all experienced. Vsauce's video on Juvenoia explains part of this better than I ever could, and it's a great breakdown of how sentiment becomes reality, so go watch that if you haven't already. But to summarize, Juvenoia is a term coined by David Fingelhor. It's stated as an exaggerated fear about the things influencing kids these days. And it shows us why these reactions can't be trusted. For example, newspapers in the 1800s criticized the short letters people sent as not real connection, like full sheets. And at the turn of the 20th century, people were concerned that family gatherings were dominated by the silent reading of magazines. As Michael points out, it reads like something said today about texting. A lot of how we feel on this topic is driven by emotion, not fact. But this isn't to downplay the effects of technology. We're still waiting to see how new advancements truly affect developing minds, and the addiction is real. But is it technically the internet or technology forcing this addiction? Really, all it's doing is providing the means for other methods of addiction to become easier. Gambling is now at your fingertips and in your video games. Social media lets us kill time constantly on articles and clips like we may have done with magazines before, and texting a lot has replaced standing by the home phone twirling the cord. A paper in the 1990s by David N. Greenfield exploring internet addiction stated, "The internet simply makes everything easier to acquire, and therefore that much more easily abused." What he found is that internet addiction mimicked the patterns of addiction found in other areas, such as the mood-altering effects of drugs and alcohol. Drinking to forget is, in a way, like drowning out the thoughts with a constant stream of media, although I'd never go so far as to say they're the same. So what we can see is that, yes, technology addiction does exist, and in a way it didn't before. Lain said what was going to happen before it did, but it did so by understanding our digital age. It's just another invention or group of inventions from humanity, one which, like any other, can be used and abused depending on the user. The hammer was made to drive in nails, but it's also been used for murder. Saying that would happen isn't predicting the future per se, it's knowing how humans use things. Lain just had its finger on the pulse of human nature. One of the things Serial Experiments Lain does best is in presenting us with interesting personalities of one single character and allowing us to witness their reaction to it. There are 3 distinct Lains, distinguished usually by outfit but always by demeanor. We witness them grow and change, swap depending on the situation or place. They come to fight each other as the lines blur, and all we know is that Lain is attacking Lain. By the end, she's likely some amalgamation of all 3, completely changed due to the personalities the Wired spawned of her. But it's not just her. There are plenty of people in the series who exhibit this kind of persona-based behavior. There's all the knights who hide behind anonymity. There's the people Lain receives information from a number of times, from a floating mouth she calls the Cheshire Cat to a wire-framed stripper. Her friends even directly mention this aspect of things, saying it's expected for people to act differently on the Wired. We see clearly that most everyone is taking on some kind of persona. Is that part of why there's no connection in her world? Is that why quotes like Shogo Makishima's point-and-click replacement feel so relevant to us? Now, I could state many of the same things I did for the last section about this one on multiple or different personas online compared to being in person. From catching predators to roleplay accounts, we can see any number of examples where someone has taken on a personality they couldn't have without access to the internet. It is true that we tend to act differently, especially with the added layer of anonymity provided by sitting behind a screen. But that anonymity may be the key to proving this is more than a simple how and when prediction. I think it ignores too much to say that technology or the internet has made our personas split. We've all been dealing with multiple selves long before we had to make Google accounts. There are social selves that we all have, depending on the time or place or who's around. We tend to behave differently. For example, usually friend groups come to be out of common interests. For me, it's usually anime or, say, trading card games. Now, my analytical side comes out with anime, so my friends who know me through that know that side of me, but there's no need to get philosophical with card games. I don't change entirely, but something I consider to be a large part of my being isn't present with one of these groups. At times, I may want to talk about it, but I feel I shouldn't to try and avoid awkward moments. Gradually, they come to know me as someone who isn't that, and I become less likely to introduce that part of myself because doing so would shake up the guaranteed stability. And this phenomenon is probably seen best in workplaces. Introverts and extroverts can actually swap sides when in career mode because doing so presents them a better chance to move up, preserves what they feel is their true self for their off hours, or more things like that. I spend most of my free time alone in analysis mode. But when I'm at my day job, I tend to be a bit more outgoing and attempt to build relationships with my coworkers. If I run into an issue, which happens a lot, I'll always have someone easily to ask for help. Being social reduces my level of stress at work, so I become a shifted version of myself while I'm there. And I didn't choose to do this consciously, it just simply kind of happened. I also don't bring up and never want to bring up things I consider crucial to myself at work because I don't want to be judged for them and risk my career for myself. It's messed up, but it's how our world is. So they continue to know me as someone that I'm not. Once again, the internet hasn't made the issue, it simply made it more convenient. I would argue the anonymity of it all actually helps to prove the point. Detached from the confines of physicality, we're much more free to be something the world around us says we can't be. Our age, race, sex, none of it can be proven to be one way or the other. We're able to be something different and take that opportunity. It's a statement about the progression of tech, but in regards to human nature. Say you considered online personas to be an issue that needed to be solved. Would you try to prevent them without understanding why people had them? We need to look at the root cause of things a lot more, and that's why I think we need to look deeper than just, it said this would happen. Very much related to the prior section, we can also mention the general psychological impacts The Wired has on Lain, specifically the negative ones. It's not just that she has multiple personalities, but it's who those personalities are, how they're shaped. They're spilling out from The Wired and into the real world, impacting her friends, her family, and the wider world around her in ways she's not even aware of and can't control. The scene where Lain strangles herself, met with a
"Look at me, I'm committing suicide."
It's one of the most memorable moments of anime to me for a reason. It's unique and shocking. But a less literal reading of the situation makes it even more shocking. It's not just Lain fighting against rumors of herself online or some odd statement she made like it would be for us, but it's a literal battle for who she is, how she's being shaped by The Wired. Which one will take over her body? Which one will maintain her relationships? Which one will dictate the direction of her life? These were all things that weren't certain before she dove into technology, but only became worsened by the impact it had on her and the world around her. She doesn't know who or even why she is anymore. She's lost her place, outcast, and removed from the world around her. This is where the comparison naturally comes to social media and its negative impacts. We can say this because social media is one's presence on the internet in our modern age, which is also what causes Lain harm in the series, the fact that she is interacting and on The Wired. In our world, it's much different, but we're beginning to see the impact social media has on us. Studies conducted via survey, predominantly on college-age adults, show some results with interesting correlations. Most importantly, those who utilize more social media platforms also had the highest risk of depression, and a separate study showed that limiting time on Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat correlated with a reduced rate of depression between an active and control group. Plus, there's always the recent news from Facebook's own internal documents showing the company, which was attempting to roll out an under-13 Instagram, knew its existing Instagram platform was increasing negative feelings and in turn unhealthy habits among teens. And there's always the anecdotal evidence of large names taking social media breaks to improve their mental health, whether it's dealing with insults or wasting the day away scrolling. However, these studies also make clear there isn't a direct causation here. I'll read a few quotes from them. It may be that people who suffer from symptoms of depression or anxiety or both tend to subsequently use a broader range of social media outlets. For example, they may be searching out multiple avenues for a setting that feels comfortable and accepting. And from the second study, when you look at other people's lives, particularly on Instagram, it's easy to conclude that everyone else's life is cooler or better than yours. What's pointed to here as having a negative impact isn't social media itself, but what it's made much more efficient. social comparison. When we parse our lives down into just the interesting and fun bits and share those, it makes time spent looking at it feel like a waste for other people. And seeing only perfect pictures of someone and not the 17 that were deleted makes us feel worse about our own images. What's happened is that social media has made these aspects much more efficient, more accessible at all times and in all places. Before, to social comparisonize yourself, you have to see your friends in person or compare yourself to the people right near you, like your neighbors. Now we can do so with anyone, anywhere. And it's also put everything in one place, making it easier to find social comparison even if you're not looking for it. Now your news can come in right next to your friends' vacation photos. What we're seeing isn't a direct negative impact of technology in our future, but a negative impact of human nature made more efficient in a completely new and unchecked way. Now, there's a few things in Serial Experiments Lain that feel almost out of place. There's a brief section including a self-driving car accident, followed by the students at school speculating as to how it happened. There's a section on what's called the KID system, an attempt to harness and amplify the psychic abilities of children into one collective. Going horribly wrong and destroying the children's lives, the experiment is destroyed, but the data is later dug back up. And in the first episodes, we're introduced to a drug called Accela, a small piece of tech taken like a pill that gives the feeling of acceleration. I saved this one for last because it sums up these seemingly random elements into what they are. They're all examples about the rapid advancement of technology leading to dangerous consequences. It's unchecked acceleration, like the drug which leads a man to perform murder-suicide in front of our main characters. And naturally, Lain's arc encapsulates this as well. Her room suddenly turns from an empty space to a collection of PC parts to a literal den complete with a tumor of camels bursting from the side. I don't think the idea here is very subtle. Rapid advancement has caused rapid harm. This is another one which has some direct correlations to reality. We've seen crashes and fatalities from self-driving cars, and better processes for growing and processing marijuana has led to THC concentration of products growing from 13% to 56% over 20 years, although that one's only tangential to technology and it also isn't going to kill you but just make you really want that bag of chips, which just kind of sounds like a good night. But it still helps to show just how rapidly things can advance with no guarantees of how safe they'll be. We could lump technology addiction in here as well. The Wild West of everyone having access to technology all the time would be like if every street corner had a tap you could just walk up to and drink out of. It's something potentially addictive going completely unregulated. But that's where we can start to break down the idea of this being something of the future. Human history is a constant experiment of making a new advancement, only to realize it's wildly dangerous and then having to deal with the consequences. Let's look back at cars for one more moment. Now, today they're still dangerous and unruly. Some 35,000 Americans die every year in car accidents, even with airbags and seatbelts and traffic lights and turn signals and everything we know today. Tangentially, the culture of bigger, meaner cars has actually contributed to this. If you want to look at how a culture of appearance can have unforeseen and negative impacts, check out that side of things. But back on track, imagine driving without any safety features both in the car or on the road. Well, that world once existed. Introduced near the turn of the 20th century, the early days were well documented in Detroit, which would become the US car capital. There were no stop signs, lane markings, brake lights, street lights, traffic signals, or even licenses. It was common for 13 or 14-year-olds to drive their families around or make deliveries, where they were encouraged to drive faster by their employers. The debate in courthouses swirled as to whether cars were inherently evil, and to try and adapt the situation from previous law, it was suggested that automobiles are to be classed with ferocious animals, and the law relating to the duty of owners of such animals is to be applied, although they stated there was an obvious difference in the situation. But it shows how dire the need for change was. And all of this was when the number of cars was on a drastic rise, going from 200,000 across the country in 1909 to 2.25 million in 1916. But over time, everything we know today was developed to stem the tide of danger. This is the stage we're at with our current rapid advancements. The internet is inherently hard to regulate and as such is tricky to develop these safety features for. In an advanced free state, you can't limit time on it because it's needed for daily life. What if you needed to access an important email or something like that? The digital age is a much more rapid and unknown frontier than most, but it's still in line with what we've experienced in the past. It can be predicted with more certainty if you look at what came before it. We can move on to one of my favorite details in the anime, how casually adult everything is despite happening to junior high students. And I don't mean in the typical anime way of why does everything revolve around teenagers, but why is there a club where people are doing hard drugs that 12-year-olds can come to? Why don't they have any reaction to the suicide that happens right in front of them in that club? Why are kids playing horror dungeon crawler games that get mixed up with actual kid games and leads to death? Lain's sister stays away from home, and when she is home, sneaks alcohol from the fridge. Lain is online speaking to wireframe strippers about the underhanded dealings of a massive corporation. All these children are much more grown up, or at least acting more grown up than they should be, right? This comes to our real world once again, where yes, there's a tangential truth. Because of the internet, we do have access to immediately very adult content. There's violent video games and videos. We can talk to anyone of any age for better or worse, and anyone can look up porn whenever they want. Because kids can now observe everything about adults' culture, they are becoming more like them in a way. However, I think the panic of kids growing up too fast is much like the reaction to addiction to technology. It's not that kids are more adult, it's that they live in a different world which impacts them differently. For example, juvenile arrest rates are down, as are violent crimes by youths overall. Teenage pregnancies are dropping since 1991, meaning at minimum, a younger generation is practicing safer sex. And here I'm going to defer to some anecdotal evidence from my parents. When my dad was 14, living in a working class neighborhood of the city, he would get kicked out by his father, who was constantly drunk, go up to the bar in the corner and get handed beer out of the back door, go down by the train tracks in the swimming hole, get in fights and jump off a cliff into the water, throw shopping carts on the train tracks and watch them fly when the trains crashed into them, and then get high to top it all off. I think it's safe to say that's much more out of character for childhood activities than anything I did at 14. Is playing Call of Duty really going to make you more violent than getting in an actual fight? The answer is no, but I wanted to ask it like that anyway. The immediacy and convenience of technology has allowed younger generations to have a much greater identity of their own. They haven't grown up too fast or awfully, we just see them a lot more now in a world different from the one that we grew up in. This is what Lain shows us, kids shaped by their world, nothing more. For a rather simple one, we have the ease at which breaches of privacy can occur. Naturally, this comes from Lain herself, as she encounters people who know her that she doesn't know, but one of herselves is also the perpetrator of it. She, through some means, watches as Alice engages with her most closely held desires, a secret she doesn't wish anyone to know, that she's in love with one of their teachers and acts on it alone physically. One of the Lanes leaks this to the world, leading to her being labeled as a peeping Tom and nearly destroying her relationship with Alice and life overall. What's really striking about this to me, other than a couple lines from Spike Spiegel's voice actor, is how easily it happens. Lain literally just opens the door and everything she could want to see is right there in the open. She was able to then spread that information without even realizing it herself. Because of the connection to the wired and humanity becoming more blurred, Alice's secret was easy to discover even when she never told or wanted to tell anyone. With our current concerns about internet privacy, you can probably see where this one is going. As we all know, personal data has become a hyper-valuable commodity. From a story of Target knowing a girl was pregnant before her family, to the downright insanely targeted AI-generated t-shirts you can find, everything you do online goes into feeding these ads. Just today, I got ads for Commander decks for Magic despite not playing the game myself, because people I was engaging with were actively discussing it around me. In fact, the profits from user-generated ad revenue for Google has had a 1,800% increase in under 20 years, going from 1.13 USD in 2001 to 20.25 in the 2020s. Just by existing, you allow companies to make money by trying to help other companies sell you things to try and make their own money. You can see breakdowns of how much of your data companies share, with big names like Facebook coming in at 86% of the data they collect on you being shared. That's anything from your purchases in location to contact information and searches. The way in which our information is bought and sold has exploded as the internet came to dominate our lives and cultures. However, this isn't something that's technically new. The motivation for money has existed long before the modern age, and that's what's driving our current boom like any others. The only thing which has changed is, again, how convenient it's become to collect and store. We can look back at credit card companies in the latter half of the 20th century, where a mixture of regulation and company advancements led to data on purchases being stored and collected together, rather than individual receipts being sent back to you for review. This allowed companies to now sort and collect information easily, which meant they could also analyze your purchases and advertise different products and services of their own, or sell it to other companies who may have had a product it seems like you like. This is the basic version of what happens today, but the desire to collect information goes way back, even further than that. Into the 20s and 30s, we saw the development of what we now know as market research in the modern age, where anything from talking to people on the streets to focus groups would be used to create general information based on demographic. For example, this is what 100 white men in their 20s thought of this statement: "They may like your product." It was primitive, yes, but privacy has always been the enemy for those with ill intent. It's simply become easier to break it down. The last thing I want to cover is the requirement for technology. I'll be brief here, as the anime revolving around it kind of sums this point up quite well already, but some specific details never hurt. We have the side note that computer-dedicated courses are being heavily taught. In fact, I believe it's the only thing we see being taught in the anime, even to the younger children we see in Siberia. They're already experts on this subject at a very young age. There's the mention from Lain's friends of,
"You really ought to check your email at least once a day."
and as always with her father,
"Your school chums must be leaving you in the technical dust."
Lain is arguably behind everyone else. While they're all essentially adults, she's at home in footy pajamas. Part of her lack of connection and why she attempts to solve it as she does, falling down the slippery slope, is that technology is required. Once she started, stopping wasn't an option. Whether it's just a common point to talk about or share an interest in, it's also how her friends communicate. It's what they're teaching kids for the future. It kind of is everything. Without it, she really would be left behind. This is something we saw to an extreme extent in our real world as the 2020s assaulted us in full force. As schools went to remote learning, the dreadful state of American infrastructure left many families without the necessary means to keep up with the necessity for remote learning. Numerous stories emerged of kids sitting in fast food parking lots for Wi-Fi since they had none at home. There were stories of entire families being forced to sit in a car outside of McDonald's because they only had a single parent or only one available who needed to keep an eye on them all. Adding to that one is also the fact that an automobile is also required to get somewhere with Wi-Fi in most of these areas. But this was an issue even before 2020, as we've known for some time that the shift to technology in a country which didn't provide the necessary means left many children behind in terms of schooling. As more and more assignments needed access to the internet, some kids are left unable to complete their assignments or have to take a much longer amount of time to do so. I used to always have to go to the library to type and print my assignments. It added a lot of time to getting things done, but I was lucky to still do well. For some, this leaves them behind, and in an already struggling system, they never get the help they need and are lost in the cracks, whatever their intent or level of effort truly was. We can also see how required technology is in securing a job. Listings are everywhere, but all at once online, giving you an immediate edge. You're able to get and send information necessary to apply to 5 jobs in the time it would take someone for an in-person application to apply to 1. You can easily adapt cover letter templates and resume templates, and you have immediate knowledge of advancements in the opportunity and everything like that. I couldn't imagine finding a good job without constant internet access. And further with jobs, the new trend of branding doing what the role requires as quiet quitting shows a disturbing trend. The convenience of technology has made working after hours, always being available to put in more time, always being on call, the normal. People doing their jobs and going home isn't quiet quitting, that's just called employment. Our view has been so skewed, doing your job is being called quitting. In this way, technology has made our lives, at least our work lives, a little bit worse. I saved this section specifically for last because it brings things into a very direct and harsh truth that just happened around us. The digital and physical are more one than we like to think. One is having massive impacts on the other. I always scoffed off the Senguji quote from Psychopaths where he claims people relying on technology are more or less cyborgs, but there is some truth to it. Lain did somewhat predict the future, but it did so by looking at humans themselves and by understanding what technology is. The process of making our lives more efficient. The abacus made math easy, then mechanical calculators replaced that one, then digital ones, and now everyone has one in their pockets at all times. We used to walk, but then we started riding horses and wagons, and then trains let us go faster than ever before, but cars, we could do it on our own, and then planes let us go anywhere. Human innovation is simply this, providing wide-scale efficiency. What we're seeing with the digital age is not something new, but rather the rapid advancement of this process, and then it's only rapid because each generation of technology is inherently faster than the one before. That's the only way it can be advanced. In the past, they looked at their current advancements as rapid as we do now. I think the danger Lain predicted isn't as shallow as social media or phone addiction or online personas, but rather something about human nature which caused these things to explode. We didn't think before we decided to advance, we simply made things more efficient because that's what we do. It wasn't planned that Facebook or Twitter or Instagram would dominate the internet, it just happened. It's part of how we evolved to be what we are. But at what point are we too efficient? What things should and shouldn't be made efficient? Does our socializing need to happen in the same place we get our news all the time? Should work really be able to reach us at any and all hours when greed always seems to win? Should we make education more efficient at the cost of some kids being completely left behind? Should we be using time and energy to focus on the other planets and stars when ours is currently dying? There's a lot of good that comes from efficiency. Medical advancements, for instance, will always be welcome, and the ability to speak to anyone, anywhere helps broaden our horizons. But we need to be careful with how we advance. It needs to be done carefully and many times paired with legislation which allies science and goodwill. To restate what I said about Steins Gate years ago, science has no inherent morality. We have to make it so ourselves. What led Lain's journey down the path of self-deletion was the fact she dove into advancement without caution, allowing herself to be swept up by whatever seemed to fit best or be needed at the moment. She thought about what she was doing, but not why she was doing it. So I think we should shift the conversation on the prophetic nature of serial experiment Lain. It's not what it predicted that's amazing, it's why it was able to do so. And we should pay more attention to that. But anyway, I won't ruin the ending of this video with a super long outro. I'll just say there's important links in the pinned comment, most importantly my Patreon, where these lovely people above me support the channel directly and help me keep doing this thing I love to do, and hopefully you love as well. But a big thank you to anyone and everyone who's watching this. I'm already rambling, so I'll just say thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.